lights down, there we go. Right, evening everybody. It's Wednesday the 13th of July, and I need to do some whiskies tonight because tomorrow the 14th of July is our wedding anniversary, and I would be in trouble if I did some whiskey on that day, I tell you, even though I'll probably need it. Anyway, so today I met a man in a pub car park, which was all very dodgy, but it had been prearranged, and it was somebody that I had encountered on Twitter, so that's not making it sound much better, is it? Basically, there's a guy, whiskey blogger called Soren Krebs, who you can find him on Twitter at OCD Whiskey. Got a very good blog. He's probably not going to want me to do this, but here's a picture of him, just quickly, of him handing over the two samples that he gave me. Now, one of them I've already done, the Auchentoshan, but I'm going to save that for afterwards because it sounds very, very good indeed. But the other one was this one, which is an American whiskey, and I'm doing my American whiskies, and I'm nearly at the end of them, so it's as good a time as any to do this one, which is Woodford Reserve, which you've probably come across if you're watching in the UK, because it's one of the bigger UK bourbon brands. So, Woodford Reserve, very recognisable on the shelf, looks like this, really nicely packaged. I think the bottle is kind of the key selling point of it, in terms of it stands out, it looks fantastic. I can remember the first time I saw it and instantly went, yeah, I've got to get myself a bottle of that looks absolutely brilliant, almost irrespective of what it's like inside. Now, Woodford Reserve is owned by Brown-Forman, who own the Woodford Reserve Distillery, another distillery that you may not have heard of called the Shively Distillery, and then another one that you might have heard of called the Jack Daniel's Distillery. So the Woodford Reserve Distillery is 8 miles outside of a town called Versailles, which is here. And it was a distillery built in 1838 by a guy called Elijah Pepper, and it was handed over to his son Oscar, and it was actually known as the Old Oscar Pepper Distillery for a while. Before, before it was sold to Leopold Labrotte and James Graham in 1878. Now, if I put the bottle back up, you'll notice that above Woodford Reserve it does actually say Labrotte and Graham, and they're still keeping ties to that name, kind of giving it some kind of history. That's my dishwasher, not my stomach, by the way. So, Labrotte and Graham ran the distillery through Prohibition, but it wasn't actually operating during Prohibition, and they then sold it to Brown-Forman in 1941. Now, with it being built in 1838, it's actually one of, if not the oldest bourbon distillery in Kentucky, but it's not the oldest continual. There's some argument as to whether that's Maker's Mark or Buffalo Trace, but during Prohibition it did shut down, so it's not a continuous process, so it's not the oldest operating. It was actually mothballed by Brown-Forman in 1968, and then they sold it, but they then bought it back in 1993, so again in that period it wasn't actually doing anything, and then they launched Woodford Reserve as the brand in 1996. Now, as I say, it's quite prevalent in the UK, and it's arguably almost bigger in the UK than it is in the US. You're looking at about 30 quid in most of the major supermarkets in the UK, so Tesco, Asda, Sainsbury's are selling it. Amazon, I think, have got it at the moment for about £24.50 or something like that. Occasionally you'll see it as low as like 22 quid. In the US, it's only about $25 to $30. So in all honesty, in terms of the markup that you tend to find in the UK, it's not actually that bad a price, to be perfectly honest. It's triple distilled as well, which is quite unusual for bourbon. It's 72% corn, 18% rye, and 10% malted barley. It's not got an age statement on it, but it's apparently at least 6 years old. So really popular. Now, they do actually name the batches and the bottles. It's kind of one of these where it's sort of small batch, but not, because they're making it consistently. So if you're a Woodford Reserve nerd, apparently this one from Soren was batch 110, bottle 170. Whether that means anything, I don't know, because they're all released at 43.2%. Why 43.2%? Who knows? Seems very, very specific. So, just realised my belt's creaking on here, and it probably sounds like I'm doing lots of farts, and I'm not, I swear, honest to God. Maybe one.
Now, I have had this a few times. I had a bottle of this, got my way through the bottle a couple of years ago, and it was classic bourbon. It was everything that you would look for in a bourbon. Nothing particularly outstanding, but it was just classic bourbon characters. And on the nose, it's vanilla-y. There's a very, very slight hint of mint, but kind of like sweet spearmint. There is some heat on it, but it's not overpowering. There's dark fruits, but it's like dark cherries and Christmas cake, but that vanilla element almost makes it kind of fruitcakey, but then also like a dark cherry compote or a dark fruit crumble, sort of like a winter fruit crumble, that sort of thing. But there's then this freshness to it as well. It's rich, it's warming. There's a lovely burnt caramel feel to it. There's a nice bit of heat, but it's not too overpowering. It's really, really nicely balanced. It's slightly on the softer side. So if you like heat in bourbon, it may not have quite enough for what you'd be looking for. It's on the smoother side, but it's nowhere near as smooth as like an Angel's Envy or a Basil Hayden or something like that. It's really, really nicely balanced. I can see why this is so popular. Arguably for some people, it might not have quite enough individuality to it and quite enough unique character. I would have said previously that it's a classic bourbon character, but to be perfectly honest, there's more in something like the Elmy Tea Lee, which gives you classic bourbon characters and a bit more oomph than this does. This is very, very smooth and very easy drinking, and it's got a classic bourbon character to it, but it's dialed down a notch than something like the Elmy Tea Lee. So prior to me trying the Elmy Tea Lee, this would have been my classic stereotypical bourbon all the way through. Now, not so much. It's just lacking something ever so slightly. Not massively so. And to be perfectly honest, if you never tried Elmy Tea Lee, or if you didn't have admittedly the range of bourbons that I've gone through in the last couple of weeks, this is doing everything that you would look for in a bourbon whiskey, and it's actually a very good introduction to a bourbon as well, because it's got a little bit of heat but not too much. It's got the depth and the richness and the smoothness. It's very easy drinking, but it doesn't really have the fire and the heat than quite a few other bourbons had. So this would be a good introduction where you could give it to somebody that's not had bourbon and go, right, bourbon has these flavours, and you can then take a step up into something with a bit more oomph to it. Go away, bloody fly. The only problem with it being summer is you have the windows and the doors open, and then flies keep buzzing in and they never frickin' leave. And I can see why this is so popular. I can see why this is, and I've found it particularly in the UK, is this is almost like the Jack Daniels of bourbon, in that people go to Woodford Reserve because it's safe, it's got everything that you want, it's smooth and easy drinking, it's got a bite to it, it looks really, really pretty, the bottle's fantastic, it's great to give as a present, and it's not going to offend pretty much anybody. There's nothing outstanding about it, there's nothing mind-blowing, there's nothing unique, there's nothing that gives it any individual character, but what it does really, really well, and there is no complaints, there's no arguments on that at all. It's a very, very good bourbon. It's smooth, it's easy drinking, you're not going to have any problems with this whatsoever. And I can't fault it, I honestly can't fault it. Is it a little boring? Possibly, but that's a comment from somebody that has just had 20 bourbons in the last few weeks, something like that, where they've got some individual characters and there's been some absolutely standout ones, and this does a job. It's absolutely fine. So yeah, you can buy a bottle of it if you can find it. 24 quid at Amazon's I think a really good price, and if you can find it for a little bit less on a special offer, I'm sure I've seen it at like 22 quid on some crazy price cut, particularly at Christmas. Get it, you really can't go wrong with it. It's a cracker, it's really, really good. I'm not waxing lyrical about it because there's nothing particularly outstanding about it, but it just does what it needs to do, and it's a really, really good solid bourbon. Right, it's enough waffling on. I shall do a quick rinse out, and I shall see you at the next one. Cheers.